Hey, welcome to One Vlog Podcast. This is Michael Jullian here at One. Welcome. I'm doing a vlog and a podcast here that is an offering to the global community as a one community. That was my vision, to inspire us, unite us as a global community, connect us, and provide us just some better mental, physical, and spiritual well-being. Right now, information that we can all utilize to achieve those things is crucial and vital based on how intense the situation is getting, in my view, out there in the world. We need to look at a lot of positive content and resources right now to overcome very challenging times around the globe. So I created One, which is a platform that connects people from diverse cultures around the world and communities to share our stories and create content, conduct interviews with amazing people from all walks of life and many diverse cultures, and provide just some information that can better serve our mental, physical, and spiritual well-being, but also serve as an introspective to our connection as human beings. And the idea was dawned out of my project Live It Stoke that I started years ago after some very, very heavy challenges and near-death experience. And I created a channel and some videos, did some interviews on the power of positive thinking back then to overcome challenges and obstacles in our lives. And that's how One was birthed, or dawned, if you will. So I'm very happy that you're here and listening, tuning into this episode of One World. This is episode 1 of this particular podcast category that I have on my channel here, which is called One World, where I'm talking about the state of our planet. Things that are affecting us all and impacting us all as human beings, and to provide some data and some resources and maybe some positive energy and positive messaging about how we can do better than survive right now through such challenging times. So welcome to the episode. Right now, I'm going to discuss the pressing issues of our time, and one of the biggest pressing issues in my view, and I think most people will agree, is, climate change and how intense it is. I've been wanting to talk about this for a long time, and I've been watching it happen and been very aware of rapid changes in terms of the earth and the weather systems and climate change. My past was I grew up in Tucson, Arizona when I was a child. Which is a very, very hot place. Most people know that Arizona and Phoenix, pretty much the southern part of Arizona, is blazing hot now that climate change is in full swing and really putting the pressure on us. And, I remember thinking as a kid, I'm out there riding around in 110 degree heat, and, was an athlete, was all about it, raced bicycle motocross and played tennis in it. This is why pretty much every single home around us had a swimming pool, because if you didn't have one, you were miserable. We're all living in our air conditioning, many hours of the day. And back then in the 70s, being a 70s kid, the reality was I was getting screamed at by my father based on making sure that I didn't have my hands on the thermostat, because we were in the same situation, in the same conditions in many, many ways that we are today, which is that the cost of energy is going through the roof. We are in a very critical recession and heading into something worse. So that's another reason I wanted to talk about it. And I think it's a subject to be touched on because it affects us all as human beings. I also wanted to provide some information and data on it. And I depending on what side of the fence you're on, we've got a bunch of different opinions on this thing, and we've got people around the world that just absolutely deny any claim, any scientific research, any evidence that climate change exists. They're just like, no way, man, the earth just does shit and that's it, and that's what we have. There's no climate change. The earth is just changing as it needs to. And of course, here we are in the most intense situation and circumstances I've ever seen. They're unprecedented. So I'm definitely here to challenge both sides of the fence on this, but I wanted to definitely provide information on the subject in the event that you're uncertain about what's really going on. And I've been researching a lot of facts, a lot of data through A lot of research has been put up from various universities, various scientific research labs around the world, and been really studying what is truly believed right now just by posing questions and trying to get answers to those questions. So with that said, I figured it would be very pertinent to talk about 20 scientific facts about climate change in the present 2023 and what that will mean going beyond this year. Now, the first thing that came up in my research here was carbon dioxide concentrations in the atmosphere have reached 420 parts per million, which is ppm, which is the highest in the past 3 million years. Now, you might hear that and say, oh my God, the first reaction is, that's devastating. That's so high. There's no way we could sustain it, sustain these circumstances. But of course, in the past million years, could have another meaning there. It's just we're at the highest peak because of many other factors. There's a lot of other things in play, and that's really what I wanted to provoke here as well. We've got situations like, and statistics and factors that are pertinent, which would be overpopulation, growth of global population. Does that contribute? Yes. In many ways, it is the primary contributor because we need so much more to sustain so many more people. So I don't know. There's a couple of ways to look at that, I guess. What was the second thing I saw here? Global temperatures have risen by 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels, triggering widespread climate impacts such as heat waves, floods, droughts, and wildfires. And obviously, if you own a cell phone and you are not living, remotely off-grid with absolutely no technology, obviously, we've all been inundated with information that is intense. And at times, for me, can be a little overwhelming to look at. Sometimes it feels a bit scary, more than a bit, in terms of what's happening with our planet. So the fact that it's risen by 1.5 degrees Celsius, at that rate, scientists are predicting that it's going to do it every 5 to 10 years, which eventually will make the Earth uninhabitable. So this is heavy. And we're watching definite impacts in places like Spain. We're watching it in Australia. We're seeing it intensely in the United States, just in terms of how things had been happening. And of course, now we've gotten the backlash and the reverse in terms of all the snowfall. And now we're having, record flooding and the cause and effectual result. But 3 here. Let's see, what was 3 on the list here? The Arctic has experienced a loss of sea ice volume of approximately 50% compared to the average from 1979, I'm a 70s kid, to 2010. Now that one's huge. That one's huge in my book. 50% in terms of loss on the caps from 1979 to 2010. 2010 was a while ago. That's 20 years ago? So, major factor there. The rate of the ocean acidification has increased by 30% since pre-industrial era, threatening marine ecosystems and fisheries. That one, I think, I don't know. I mean, I definitely cannot speak for all folks, but I think we're all pretty aware around the globe. If for any reason you like anything about the ocean, love anything in the ocean, eat anything out of the ocean, we've all become aware of what's going on with our marine ecosystems and fisheries, and it's not good. Extreme weather events such as hurricanes, typhoons, and cyclones are becoming more intense due to climate change. And apparently they are, in a massive scale kind of way. Right now, it is May 1st, 2023, and I am actually conducting this podcast from Playa Hermosa, Costa Rica. And I've been watching avidly and checking in on a daily basis in terms of what's really happening with the weather and the weather patterns and the intensity in the United States. And it is unbelievable to try to actually conceive what's happening right now in terms of cyclones, hurricanes, water funnels, everything else that's been happening, and the tornadoes. The tornadoes that's been highly alarming. I mean, I know that the South and the Belt get hit, and growing up in Arizona, we used to call them dust devils. That's certainly not a tornado, but can really wreak havoc. And unbelievable what we're watching right now. It's unprecedented. I mean, there were over 88 tornadoes just blew through in a 3 to 4 month cycle in the United States, in the southern belt of the United States, and we're cruising across the mid United States. Unbelievable. So obviously climate change is having a major impact on the United States in that capacity. The frequency and intensity of heat waves have increased by 10% since the 1980s. So if you just do the math on that one, you're doing what? 0.5x per year or per year into a 5 to 10 year cycle. The global sea level has risen by 20 centimeters since the pre-industrial era, and it's projected to rise by an additional 30 to 130 centimeters by 2100. Now that one is a problem. That is a very large scale problem. I mean, they're already predicting that Florida will be gone. How many countries around the world will just not be sustainable? They will literally be eaten by the ocean. So this is really a reason we need to focus on how we can try to positively delay the effects of what they're predicting we may see. The global carbon budget, the amount of carbon emissions that can either be released without exceeding a certain temperature threshold, is estimated to be 800 billion tons of carbon dioxide, CO2, for a 1.5 degrees Celsius limit, and 2,900 billion tons for a 2 degrees Celsius limit. That's a mouthful. I realize it might take a bit to wrap your head around that. But the bottom line is, that's a lot of parts per billion if we're at 800. And then a 2,900 billion ton weight for 2 degrees Celsius limit. That is intense. Absolutely intense. The world has emitted about 2.2 trillion tons of CO2 since the pre-industrial era. 2.2 trillion tons of CO2. And of course, this data is being put out and is based as factual evidence here in 2023. So you can imagine, if we're talking about that kind of time frame, the industrial era until now. The top 5 emitters of greenhouse gases are China, ironically enough. Well, it makes sense, right? They have all the manufacturing going. And they have the most people. So here again, population, industrialization. The United States is second, the European Union, India, and then Russia is in last place on that one. Believe it or not. Well, it makes sense. It's such a huge country and not as many people per capita. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, has recommended a reduction in global carbon emissions by at least 50% by 2030 and a net zero emissions of 2050 to limit global warming to a 1.5 degrees Celsius. And this is where the heavy stuff is coming in terms of a whole nother topic that isn't even, in the table of contents here, or the subject list here on this one, in terms of climate change, but it's directly related to it, which is what's happening right now with the global economy. And of course, the cometh of CBDC, digital currency, and the way for us to actually be tracked via application, which is all already happening in terms of the technology out of China and in the US and in many foreign countries right now, because they're actually trying, well, I shouldn't say trying, they are implementing, they are inventing right now the ability to track us all individually as human beings in terms of our output, which means that there is a long list of concerns with that one in terms of what we can and cannot do based on the powers that be trying to reduce it to 1.5 degrees Celsius. That one's a bit sketchy. The Paris Agreement and Global Agreement to Combat Climate Change has been ratified by 195 countries as of 2023. Now, of course, we're in the midst of something far hotter than a Cold War right now. And so my concern constantly, and my focus is where is the thinking, where is the provocation to actually make a positive turn in focusing on climate change if we're already completely and totally distracted by what's happening right now in the global marketplace and with conflict on the horizon based on trade. Well, yeah, you know, you can only focus on so many things at one time and make a big impact. This is, I don't know. That part really keeps me up awake at night from time to time, I have to be honest. The agricultural sector accounts for about 10 to 12% of all global greenhouse gas emissions, mainly from livestock production and fertilizer use. And lately we've been, on YouTube, I don't know if you're out there looking at prepper channels or just people talking about the environment in the United States right now, what's going on in terms of livestock production and or fertilizer use in the agricultural sector. But it's pretty intense right now. Got some really serious situations happening with a lot of industry really being challenged, burning down, and all of a sudden, very, very strange data coming out about them doing regulation again with emissions to be able to control farmers with how much greenhouse gas emissions they can actually emit. And of course, it's challenging their success to even have a successful stock, a successful herd, a successful farm, to have livestock to serve us in the meat industry and everything else, which, is high profile on YouTube right now. It's all over the news and is really, really a seriously major concern. The world's forests have been decreasing at a rate of about 10 million hectares per year. Hectares being acres, or a little over acreage, I believe, contributing to increased carbon emissions and biodiversity loss. So 10 million? Not good in terms of the earth heating up. The less trees, the hotter it gets. That's the bottom line with that. And the number of climate refugees, people forced to migrate due to the impacts of climate change, has increased by 50% since 2020. Now, if that's not a big bell ringer, what is? 50% of the global population who are refugees, people who are forced to migrate due to the impacts of climate change, has increased by 50% since 2020. So that's just in 3 years. You can imagine it here again, do a 5-year, 10-year, 15-year, 20-year, into the future, look at it. What are we facing in terms of migration, in terms of human population, just trying to run from it? Wow, man. The cost of climate change impacts, including health impacts, infrastructure damage, and loss of biodiversity, is estimated to be $360 billion per year, which, for me, this statistic is way, way under the cusp. I would imagine that we're double, triple that, or approaching triple that probably by the end of this year or next year. The transition to low carbon economy presents significant economic opportunities, including job creation, increased energy security, and technological innovation. And this is just a bullet point that was added at the list that I had typed into this resource. And of course, there's always going to be a chant about what money can be made. But of course, if we're trying to outrun it and we're not putting ample time into it, which is my main point here, in terms of major impactful changes, what good are the jobs? although we need those desperately, dearly right now. Oh man, what a situation. So anyway, they're the top 20 scientific facts about climate change in 2023 and beyond. Incredible to think about it. And according to the I was a big mouthful here, trying this again. According to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, if greenhouse emissions continue to rise at the current rate, the global temperature is projected to increase by 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels by around 2040. So we're only 10 years away from that. This means that the Earth's temperature could continue to rise over the next decade, leading to far more frequent and intense extreme weather events, rising sea levels, and other negative impacts. So it's just going to be a level, it's just going to intensify incrementally on top of what we're already seeing. Now, I think it's pretty intense out there. Are we in agreement? So, this is why I'm focusing on climate change today. I also wanted to research, I was thinking to myself, wow, being here in Costa Rica and being remote and I'm thinking about going back to the US and maybe doing that in a very short period of time here. Awfully interesting time to be doing that right now, considering the challenges that the US is facing and that we're facing globally with climate change. But I was really thinking about, I wonder, all this intensity and all, how much more event occurs now on a daily, weekly basis and how intense they are. How has climate change affected the United States from to pick a time period until present? And I wanted to know from maybe the 20s until now. This is what I found. That it's had significant impacts on the United States since the 20s, obviously. I mean, if it's been heating up and it has been blowing and going slowly but surely every 5, 10, 15, 20, the 20s were a long period of time, a long time ago. It was a long period of time. But the effects have become increasingly apparent in these recent decades. I mean, it's increased in intensity is my point. And I wanted to provide some examples of that. I mean, rising temperatures, on average, the temperature in the U.S. has increased by 1.8 Fahrenheit since the early 20th century, with the most significant warming occurring in the past few decades. I mean, heat waves are just rampant now and have become more frequent and intense. And we're seeing places with temperatures that have never felt it. This winter in New England looks like springtime. They just haven't been having one. Temperatures have been in the 40s and high 50s. And it's bizarre what's happening all over the U.S. in terms of that. But warming occurring in the past few decades with heat waves and all the other crises we have become more frequent and intense, which leads to heat-related illnesses and deaths. And that's something that we really need to address. Governments around the world need to focus constantly on the idea that human life is going to be taken and is being taken at a high rate of speed based on us not formulating a one community about climate change. No matter where we sit on trade or on differences about energy right now or what's going on in terms of us approaching war right now, how could it be that we're focusing on that first and not thinking about the one crucial element that affects us to stay on the planet? And that is to keep people alive and healthy on this planet. So that's really my focus. In regard to extreme weather events, the frequency and severity of extreme weather events such as hurricanes and floods and droughts and wildfires have increased to the point where it's getting uninhabitable. People are now literally forced to leave, and the United States has completely shifted around in terms of migration path. I mean, obviously we've seen, the huge, or it's been based on the economy itself and resources within primary states in the United States, which we all know. sea level rise, we've got that to deal with. I mean, the sea level along the U.S. coast has risen by 8 inches since the early 20th century. And it's projected to continue rising in the coming decades, no doubt. It's led to increased flooding, erosion, and it poses a threat to coastal communities and infrastructure, which we're just seeing repeatedly now. All over the Floridian coast, all over the California coast, on the East Coast, on any coast. So, and the impacts of the ecosystem as well. Climate change has affected ecosystems in the U.S., including changes in the timing of seasonal events, such as plant flowering, which is huge because that is food, right? And bird migrations. And of course, now Mother Earth and the circle of life and the natural pro forma of the circle of nature is now altered. So it's going to start to impact in a gigantic way in terms of ecosystem. It's also led to disruptions in ecological interactions and biodiversity loss beyond our comprehension, right? And most importantly, I think, when we think about it, is the impacts on human health. All of these things have a critical impact on human health. I mean, climate change has had significant impacts on human health in the U.S., including an increased incidence of respiratory, cardiovascular diseases due to poor air quality, as well as increased incidences in waterborne, vector-borne diseases due to changes in temperature and precipitale patterns. So I mean, bacteria grows. We're in a situation where it's literally feeding it because nothing is really working properly in the circle, and we're dealing with all of the things that I've already mentioned here in terms of just what's happening with climate change. So overall, climate change has had significant impacts on the U.S. over the past century. And that's what I wanted to hit, which is this is something we have not been paying attention to. And we need to put our minds and hearts and souls together as one community and a global community, and to try to, I think the one thing we can all do just as humans, I'm not a scientist, and I'm not somebody who can make impactful, positive changes in a massive global scale kind of way when it comes to climate change. But I am a human being who can make the human community and the global one community aware of what's actually happening. And I think it's really vitally important because there's been so much infighting about this. Absolutely ridiculous. I mean, places like Spain are burning down. Australia just literally has been on fire for 3 to 4 years straight. We've got it going on every single summer and spring in California, to the point where the smoke blows across into New England, where I used to live. Now, if that isn't proof that climate change is real, I don't know what is. So that's really, where I stand on the issue. And I wanted to address it today in terms of speaking up about it and providing some information about it, some facts, and what we're really up against if we want to survive on this planet in the coming years. I wanted to find out too, what countries in general in our one community, our global community, had been impacted most dramatically, at present. And many countries around the world are currently experiencing the impacts of climate change, and I just mentioned a few of them. But here are some of the countries that are particularly affected by the effects of climate change. In my research here, I pulled up small island developing states. So they're called SIDS, S-I-D-S, such as the Maldives, Tuvalu, Kiribati. Places like that are particularly vulnerable to the impacts of climate change because they're so small due to their low-lying geography and susceptibility to sea level rise. I mean, the ocean's just going to, is literally just eating places like this. Coastal erosion, extreme weather events, are the culprit there. Sub-Saharan Africa. Many countries in Sub-Saharan Africa are experiencing increasing temperatures, prolonged droughts, and desertification, it's a mouthful, leading to food and water scarcity, as well as displacement of people. Of course, these are some of the hottest places on the planet. And people are walking around in 125 plus degree heat. So you've got to, put your head together on that one. If it's been increasing at the rate of speed that it has, obviously it's going to lead to the loss of human life, and it's going to displace people, and it's going to definitely prolong droughts, and food and water become scarce. So South and Southeast Asia are also heavily hit. Many countries in these regions, such as Bangladesh, India, and the Philippines, are experiencing sea level rise that are unprecedented. Flooding and tropical storms, and they lead to property damage, and again, loss of livelihoods and displacement of people. People just start migrating. They got to get out. Arctic countries, such as Canada, Norway, and Russia, are also experiencing rapid melting of sea ice, and that leads to the impact on ecosystems to change dramatically. And they change in the ocean currents, and that's what affects weather patterns. So as the caps are losing, and that fact that I put up a while back about the 50%, we've got huge changes in Canada, Norway, and Russia as well. So there's just a few examples of countries that I wanted to include that are most affected by climate change. However, it is important, obviously, to note that all countries are vulnerable to the impacts of climate change. And that's the one thing I want to raise in terms of this podcast. And on this segment journey I have on my YouTube channel called One World, is to make awareness very, very important, to share the awareness, to actually put the word out about what's happening, and to actually figure out a way to bond together to find ways that we can, one, hopefully mold with the system as the system pushes us around to conform in very intense change based on climate change itself and what's going on with the global economy, and how to keep thriving and surviving on this planet and this little neighborhood we call our planet. So I think I've hit it for today. I hope that you found the information resourceful. All I can say is right now, as intense as things are for all of us as human beings out there, I'm sending light and love, positivity, and gratitude to each and every person who's taken time to listen to this podcast. Thanks for listening to my first shot at One World to talk about the effects of global climate change, how it's affecting us. And, I just really want to highly promote the whole mission of One, being that it be a resource for better mind health, body health, to provoke and to inspire and to nurture our spirits, to provide abundance in every single precious moment that we have on our planet, and to just send love to you. And I hope you have a great day, afternoon, or evening. Thank you for tuning in. I appreciate it. There'll be more episodes coming soon. So stay stoked, stay rad. We are One. And until next time, I'm Michael Jullian. Thanks for tuning in to One. Please subscribe to the channel. And there will be new podcasts coming out very, very soon, as well as videos for mind, body, spirit, abundance, and to cover subjects in the podcast such as art, music, mind waves, and the state of our planet. Until next time, thanks for tuning in to One. We are One.